Welcome, everyone. We're just letting in our participants and we'll start in about 1 minute. Welcome, everyone, again. We're just allowing participants to come in, so just hang tight. We'll start in a moment. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Jessica Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Health Institute of Western Mass. And today we are here to learn about vaping and nicotine pouches specifically. A couple housekeeping. If you have technical difficulties or need help, please send a direct chat to one of the hosts. We are recording this webinar. The recording will be emailed to registrants and posted on our Public Health Institute of Western Mass website. We will also share slides, and any questions that don't get answered during the session, we try to answer those thoroughly and then send out those responses with the recording. When we are ending the webinar, we ask that you please complete a short survey about the webinar experience. It takes about 1 to 2 minutes, and we appreciate that. We will share the link in the chat when the time comes. There will be a brief question and answer session after the presentations, and you can submit questions using the Q&A feature found on your Zoom menu bar. And if you would like to enable automatically generated captions, click the closed captioning button on your Zoom webinar. So thank you, everyone, again for joining us. Today, we're discussing the evolving landscape of tobacco and nicotine products, specifically vaping and nicotine pouches like Zyns that are ubiquitous in our communities and taking hold strong. These products have a targeted marketing heavily aimed at young people and communities of color. This webinar will offer a high-level overview of emerging products, usage trends, and potential mitigation strategies, especially relevant for youth, families, community-based organizations, and municipalities. And I am so very happy and grateful to our speakers today. We're joined by Dr. Nicole Porther, Chair of the Department of Health Professionals, Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. Dr. Porther inspires the next generation of public health practitioners by bringing public health education to classrooms and the community, and currently serves as a research consultant with BEAT in Pittsfield, exploring the health impacts of environmental exposures in Berkshire County. And we are also joined by Catherine Brooks, Senior Research Evaluation Specialist for Educational Services, who has extensive experience with leading evaluation projects and using data to promote change in our region, specifically Hampshire and Franklin counties. We are going to do a quick poll right now to understand who you are and which sectors are represented here today. So if you wouldn't mind filling out the poll very quickly, we would appreciate that. Thank you very much. And as soon as that's done, we can share with everyone. All right. I also want to say thank you to my colleagues, Sarita Hudson and Lisa Rangeli, for joining us today as well. They're kind of behind the scenes with us. So if the poll is complete, Sarita can share the summary. Wonderful. Thank you. Good group. Thrilled to have everyone here. Right. So without further ado, I would love to hand this over to Dr. Nicole Porther, who will start us off with her powerful presentation, Beyond the Cloud, Understanding Youth Vaping.
Oh, thank you. Welcome, everybody. So, as you just heard, I'm Dr. Nicole Porther. So, I'm in the Berkshires, Massachusetts College of Arts. I know for a lot of people, anything past Springfield might be a little too far. And some people think that we're in New York, but we're not. We're still in the state of Massachusetts. But anyway, that being said, it doesn't stop me from talking about what is happening within our state and as a whole, also to what's happening nationally, right? I'm sure some of you, I was just looking at that little breakdown of the who's here. I saw we had a lot of public health folks, but we also saw that we have some parents. I'm also a parent as well. And that was one of the concerns when my kids were in school, talking about vaping, the access to these particular products, etc. Can we go to the third slide, please? Oh, all right. So these are just, oh, thank you. Great. So this is just some of the things that I hopefully that we will just get from this particular chat that we're having today. The whole idea is just for you all to be able to at least understand the epidemiological profile of like what's happening, a quick snapshot of it, as well as also looking at what is causing some of our youth to actually engage. I do have to preface this and say that it is going down a bit, which is a good thing, but we do see a rise now in nicotine pouches. And my other collaborator is going to be speaking more to that. Part of it is because on these nicotine pouches, they're not regulated as much as the e-cigarettes. We have done a lot of good work within the last few years. We still need to do more, but there is hope. That's the main thing for me, for us to get out of there is hope. It's not just to leave here despairing, thinking, oh my God, this is the end. Our youth is doomed, etc. All right. So that being said, we can go to the next slide. A very quick snapshot of what is happening, looking at the CDC data, right? It is still an epidemic, right? Something that we still have to be concerned about. According to this is the National Youth Tobacco Survey in 2024, over 50% of all youth tobacco use is related to e-cigarettes, right? Just thinking about access, what it is. And then we do know there's a large share of that is related to these nicotine pouches. These are growing rapidly. And as I said earlier, it's because there's a lack of regulation and also misinformation regarding the youth in terms of what they're using. And while we do see that e-cigarette use is also in a decline, it still remains alarmingly high. And if we switch to the next slide, please, looking at Massachusetts, this is just our reality right now. So according to the Massachusetts Youth Health Survey, this was done in 2023. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, perfect. So 2023, you have about 30.4% of Massachusetts high schoolers reported having tried a vapor product, right? And that is actually down from 30.9%, but that's just 0.5%, right? So slight drop, but it's going. And there was a decrease in current use by 9.1% from 17.6% to 16%, right? And that's those numbers. So it dropped from 2021 to 2023 when last we did that particular survey. And these were just high schoolers. One of the things, though, I have to mention is that it's only rise within middle schoolers. So we have to wonder why that is happening. And I'll just give you some quick numbers here. So we have 11.7% of students, middle schoolers, who tried e-cigarettes in 2023, and that was actually up from 10.1% in 2021. And we have 4.6% of our middle schoolers who are actively vaping, and that actually went up from, it's a 6.5% increase, I believe, right, from 2021. So even though our high schoolers, we see them dropping that particular decline, we're seeing something that's also happening now with our middle schoolers. So, and this is in spite of a ban. I'm sorry about that. I'm in my office. Excuse that noise. Despite a 2020 ban on menthol cigarettes, right? And we have to wonder, is it because the industry now is they're getting smarter. Now they're also targeting, the younger age groups. So we have to pay attention to this as to what's going on. And we'll try to get to that hopefully later on in this particular talk, right? So next slide, please. So we have to think about who is in the crosshairs, who is being targeted. And as we know, especially in the realm of public health, we do have certain groups that tend to be the most vulnerable. We think about our BIPOC communities because of the historical trauma, and then you have the targeted marketing. They tend to be at a higher risk. We also have the LGBTQ and youth, and they tend to be 2 times more likely to vape due to stress, etc. And then you also have to think about individuals who may have mental health challenges and also cultural groups as well. And I will expand a little bit more if you go to the next slide, just looking at those particular numbers. Next slide, please. So looking at our rural communities, right, you would see that there is and just looking at just their geographic as well as socioeconomic status, and so I'm talking with those top two. So 32.7% of our high schools versus 26%, 1%. So those who are in rural communities versus 26.1% in urban communities, they tend to have a higher usage rate. And that could be due to, again, less access to cessation programs, right? It tends to be more normalized within these particular communities, etc. Right? Part of it is because they may not, again, have access to other activities that would also engage youth and keep them maybe more occupied, less distracted for whatever reasons. You also look at the socioeconomic status. So you have higher rates in our lower income households. Again, there is, targeted marketing to these particular groups. And some of this marketing would include things like scholarships, right? You also have limited alternatives. You also have, again, these targeted ads, right? Making it seem cool or whatnot. That it tends to be a little bit more glamorous. And we've seen that to have evolved from traditional tobacco to also to the e-cigarettes. So they still kept some of those elements, but just refined it, again, to get these youth engaged. We also, as I mentioned before, we have that racial and ethnic disparity, right? So we have varying patterns. It tends to be much higher when we talk about racial and ethnic groups among Native Americans, right? African Americans, it's still also very high compared to the white counterparts. Part of it, again, is because historically, if you think back to like what was happening in 1980s and 1990s when the tobacco industry were deliberately targeting the African American community, they would do little things like menthol cigarettes, for example, go to the subways, go to urban communities to get the youth hooked on these particular products. And just shifted a bit again to how you would target these particular groups. You also have things like historical trauma. I don't really want to delve too much into that, but that is also one of the reasons as to why certain cultural groups, certain ethnic groups would also engage in these particular products, as well as also to the targeted marketing, which tends to be very much pervasive in all these different disparities. Other things to consider as well, right, is looking at students who would tend to have lower GPAs, or they may be misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, right, with attention deficit disorders. They tend to use these particular products as a way of coping, right, because they might lack supportive interventions, etc., or it's just a way for them to just disengage from just life as a whole. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, we do have the mental health challenges, right? It's a way for some individuals to self-medicate. We're thinking about, you might have some dual diagnosis complexities, etc. And what we do know is that within this particular group, they're 3 times more likely to vape, right? Using nicotine as self-medication itself. One thing I did not include here on this particular side is that we also could look at maybe gender, right? So more females than males actually reported current e-cigarette use. And we have to take that with a grain of salt, maybe because females tend to be a little more responsive compared to the male counterparts. That doesn't mean that you have, it's just more in terms of numbers of females actually using this. So I always take everything with a grain of salt regarding that. We can move on to the next slide, please. So why do we care? Why it is that we're concerned about this particular issue? We do know that these particular e-cigarettes, you're talking about nicotine pouches, they do have nicotine, which is an addictive compound, right? And this is a little schema just to show you how much these particular products would have, particularly since the marketing piece of it tend to be very much misrepresented. A lot of times they'd say that, and if you talk to youth themselves, they would think that it's actually safer to actually engage and use e-cigarettes, right? Or to use nicotine pouches and nothing is going to happen to them without thinking that it's actually still a drug. Nicotine is a drug and it can cause a host of different problems. If you can move on to the next slide very quickly. So I just want to show you what do I mean by the problems. A lot of times people think that it is just a water vapor, e-cig, and that is not true. What these e-cigarettes have, they actually contain these harmful chemicals, right? These heavy metals, etc. So think about benzene. This is found in gasoline, right? Formaldehyde, which is used to preserve dead specimens. I'll always think back to that Truth Initiative ad with the young woman drinking the what you call liquid that the frog was preserved in. So when I talk about it and I tell my students that this is what is actually in these particular products that you're actually inhaling and put inside your body. Think about acetone, which is nail polish remover, right? You have the heavy metals, which many are known to be possible or probable carcinogens, right? And so those are the things that they're actually consuming and inhaling. And then, of course, if you go thinking back to the previous slide there, you don't have to go back, but right, those nicotine pouches like Zyn, right, how much nicotine they would actually contain, that Zyn contains the same amount as in one traditional cigarette. So that's at 6 to 28 milligrams is the same amount that you would actually get in the traditional tobacco product. And that's something that these kids may not be aware of because, and I've seen certain websites. I wish I could remember what it was called right now. I think it's Snooth or whatnot, where they were talking about this particular these pouches being very safe. It does not cause addiction, etc. Again, very misleading. If you can go proceed. So see, what are some of the clinical impacts as well as the academic impacts? I know we, again, just thinking about who we have in the room, right? Many teachers, healthcare workers, they have all reported seeing like things like attention deficits, right? Mood swings, especially things that are unexplained, not just only related to puberty, right? We also see things like athletic performance decline, right? Even though vaping companies, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, actually sponsor sports teams, right? As well as most importantly, sleep disruption patterns. And this is particularly considering that within this particular age group, they hardly get enough sleep as a whole, right? And something that we have to be cognizant of. And that will lead to a host of other issues, not just only immediately, but we're talking about later on in life as well. Next slide, please. Nicotine pouches. I know I had touched a little bit on the e-cigarettes. So this is just, again, what it is comprised of, right? These would have, again, certain types of additives. One of the good things about Massachusetts, particularly in many of our towns, they actually banned a lot of flavored e-cigarettes. But as I mentioned before, there's a rise, right, in the usage of nicotine pouches. Part of it is because they're not as regulated. So we're a little bit slow to the draw regarding that. And it's something that we have to be a little bit more aware of and actively, right, trying to address, considering that we have a lot of people that are turning to this particular product. So not just only having additives, they also have buffers and other types of chemicals that we still don't fully know what these other additives are, but the assumption could be, again, if you're looking at what had happened before with the e-cigarettes and other types of traditional tobacco products, that it could be more or less harmful to the developing body. Next slide, please. So nicotine, as many of you, right, so we have some healthcare providers as well as public health workers, harms the whole body. And just thinking about the adolescent that's still developing, it not just only rewires the brain, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but it can also affect the cardiovascular system, as we know, because it is a vasoconstrictor, right? Long-term use for some people can lead to things like hypertension and other cardiovascular diseases. We can also think about your digestive tract. Some people don't think about it, but it can increase things like acid reflux, as well as also, as we know, because you're inhaling it, affect the respiratory tract, so increasing mucus, coughing, and lead to a host of other respiratory ailments, etc. Same thing as with our traditional tobacco, is the same thing that's going to be happening with these particular products, right? And it's something that, again, we need to send this message to our young people, right? Because they all of them just assume that maybe with the water vapor, as I mentioned before, it's going to be safe, but no, because you have those particular types of chemicals and heavy metals there, it will cause these little inflammatory responses and can cause a host of other problems later on. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, there is that neurological impact, something that we have to be aware of. As we do know, the young brain is not right. It doesn't fully develop until age of 25, and nicotine exposure during this period actually alters that synaptic plasticity, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, right, of the brain that's responsible for any sort of executive function. So that early decision making, etc. And so what we do know is that early nicotine use actually increases addiction liability. So it would rewire the brain reward pathways. It would strengthen addiction risk. It actually exploits the teenage impulsivity, right? And we do know that over 80% of adult smokers actually started smoking before the age of 18. And the industry knows this. So this is why they tend to target younger people. So if you can get them very early on and you can actually change that, right? They get hooked, right? Because as I mentioned before, it actually increases that addiction liability, particularly that neural reward pathway, since it shows enhanced sensitivity to nicotine during puberty. They tend to exploit this themselves. All right. Next slide, please. Thank you. Another effect, of course, besides being the young person who's actually engaging in this habit would be, of course, who's around you, right? So we always talk about first-hand exposure, so that person who's using it, vaping, whatnot, but then think about the second-hand, right? Who is going to be there that's close by, that's going to be exposed to these particular vapors themselves? And then, of course, you have the third-hand exposure, right? That particular residue, that is something that we have to be concerned about. I was, for people who can't visualize it, I was thinking about like if you go to a lifelong smoker's house, let's say smoking regular cigarettes, right? And you remove the refrigerator, you would actually see the clear demarcation, right, of where that particular refrigerator used to be, because they have a lot of that tar deposit from that traditional tobacco product. The same thing with e-cigarettes, right? You will have a lot of that sticky residue because again, you have those chemicals, that's those heavy metals there that is going to be deposited. People who buy used cars, you could buy it from a smoker, right? Secondhand, and no matter how well they clean it, it's going to still be embedded in the fabric, right? And surfaces of that car. So you can't get rid of it. So that is going to be that third-hand smoke. And that is something that we also have to be cognizant of, particularly for younger kids who would be touching surfaces and inevitably put it in their mouth, touch their faces or whatnot. And again, they're also being exposed to these harmful chemicals. So how do they hook these kids? What are these drivers, right, for youth vaping, right? They're trying to exploit psychology. That's what it is basically. So you think about curiosity, social normalization, stress relief, right, marketing, etc. So our youth are very much easily seduced by the marketing piece, the advertising. They think about the flavors. We have been very good, as I said, in Massachusetts in terms of banning flavors, but now that they're adding it to the nicotine pouches, that is something that we also have to address, as I mentioned earlier, right? As well as also to thinking about those social influence. So what do I mean? And you can go down to the next slide by these social as well as environmental things. If you look at this particular slide, what are you seeing here? Right? I know you can't respond to me, but I could point it out. You would see that there is, again, a particular group, looking at the bottom left, right? Young girls, right, of a particular demographic, and they're supporting a basketball team, Heat, Miami Heat. I used to live in Miami, so we used to support them, right? Supporting the Heat. If you look on the left, right, there's a particular e-cigarette company that they're supporting a music festival, and then they're looking at them also supporting maybe Formula One or whatever else. So the whole idea behind it is that they have been very good, again, at using these particular marketing strategies by supporting teams, etc., in terms of really getting to the youth where the places that they're going to be, the things that they're going to see, the things that they're going to use, like social media, to get them, again, engaged, all right, curious, and of course normalizing something that is potentially harmful, right? Trying to make it seem that it's normal. we can move on to the next slide, please. So just to break it down even more, right? We're talking about like those behavioral and social drivers, right? These would include your curiosity and sensation seeking. So according to the 2023 National Youth Tobacco Survey done by the CDC, curiosity actually remains the #1 reason cited by middle and high school students for trying e-cigarettes. Not surprising, again, part of it. Just think about when you were younger, what it is that you were curious about, what it is that you wanted to do, right? Again, that prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. Those are things that we have to be aware of, and they would exploit this, right? That's for this particular industry. Also, adolescents, again, neurologically wired to seek these novel sensations and immediate rewards, right? Making them more vulnerable to these addictive behaviors because they want that dopamine rush, right? And if you go, I don't want to go, you don't have to go back, but if you think back to that earlier slide, looking at that neuron and whatnot, and when it binds that particular nicotine binds to that particular receptor, it sends that, releases those neurotransmitters, and then you get that dopamine rush. And the more you smoke, right? On the smoke or engage in that particular problem, the more that you need to keep getting that high, right? If you just think about how addiction would work. You also have the peer pressure piece as well. I'm still on the behavioral, right? So you have those normative beliefs. So youth actually reported strong social influences. They tend to perceive that everyone vape, right? Just think back again when you're younger. Sometimes you think that everybody does this, that, whatever. That is the same behaviors. It's not surprising that each generation goes through something very similar, right? It's just whatever it is changes that particular product, whatever that adverse thing would change. And that would also increase the likelihood of use. And then what the Truth Initiative, they actually found that the social normalization piece of it through peer networks often outweigh awareness of health risks, right? And then also we have that mental health coping, because we spoke about this particular demographic that tend to be more susceptible. We said that it's like they're 3 times more likely to engage, right, and using e-cigarettes. So vaping is frequently used as a coping mechanism for stress, anxiety, and depression. And this is particularly seen in the BIPOC and LGBTQ youth who face additional structural stresses, right, social stresses. So they tend to report that they are using it for more emotional relief. We can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So we do have those environmental drivers, and I just put this quick slide here so you can see what I mean by that. So these would include things like your flavorings, right? And how they would market that. I'm trying to see what is that, like that vanilla wafer. I don't eat it, but my daughter loves Sour Patch. So they add those different things to these particular entities. So when we're talking about these environmental drivers now, right? They do things like the marketing, as you see here. So the flavored products. And one of the things that we know from research, right, according to the FDA, is that 80% of youth who vape, they use it because it tastes good, as well as also you tend to associate fruity and sweet flavors with less harm, right? Despite clear evidence to the contrary. And another thing too is that we have that social media influence, so like the platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, they tend to amplify that vaping culture through viral trends and influencer promotions, etc. So they tend to be more or less exposed to that vape-related content a little bit more significantly, right? And they tend to engage in it within 6 months. Other things that we have to be aware of too, and I think I touched on this briefly, is particularly when we're talking about the socioeconomic demographics, how they would again appeal to young people and to people from lower SES groups would be offering up scholarships. So they tend to offer things like maybe from scholarship ranging from $250 to $5,000. And these would be like essays that you might have to write, right? That might talk about the advantages or the benefits of vaping compared to cigarettes. So the Associated Press actually had like a very quick little survey, all right, and they were doing a little bit of an investigative piece regarding this. And one of the companies actually asked applicants to write about whether or not e-cigarettes minimizes smoking's negative effects. So what do you think kids would write if they have to, and especially if they want to get that scholarship money to go to school or whatever it is that they need it for, right? Others also, you have the e-cigarette manufacturers, they would also say that their products are intended for adults who would want to quit smoking. But what we do know is that even though some of these scholarships are limited to like students who are 18 years and older, it's still very much open. There's a way for the young people to actually access these, all right? And they don't actually enforce these particular age limits themselves. We can move on to the next slide. So this is like what I mentioned before with that social media piece, right? Using the different platforms. So you have here about, I think sample size was about 55 or whatnot. And you have some social media influencers who would only talk exclusively about e-cigarettes, but the rest of them were actually talking about it in conjunction with other things that interest young people. So think about fashion, think about jewelry, think about beauty products. So this particular study done by Vasse in 2023, they were highlighting the fact that they not just there are different ways and means of now getting kids who might be seeking other information to now be exposed to e-cigarettes and to be getting maybe more harmful knowledge or misinformation regarding the use of e-cigarettes, and the fact that they're joining it with these products that interest youth, for them it kind of normalizes it and makes it seem a little bit more appealing, right? And they would tend to again engage. You can move on now. Thank you. So I know I kind of went through a lot of things there. Very quickly, some other environmental factors before I wrap up is that we do have other things to consider, like the school environment. We have, thinking about the school, where do kids smoke or participate and engage in using these particular products, have the school bathrooms, etc. We have to think about how does our school actually deal with these particular situations. So for example, I know many schools would do like in-school suspensions. They tend to be very much punitive, right? Or they might expel students, but they often don't provide any type of support services, right? Like cessation programs, and that tend to exacerbate that whole dropout risk as well as other inequities, right? And then what's going to happen? You're going to have these kids who now would tend to continue to engage because that again, it's a way of coping in dealing with a stressful situation, dealing with depression or whatnot. And of course, we do still, even though I would say Massachusetts has been pretty good in terms of enforcing and making sure we do have better oversight and regulation of our retail accessibility, the issue lies with the online sales piece, right? So yes, it might be a little bit more difficult for them to in person in a store, because they do not have the ID or whatnot, but it's still very much easier for for young people to actually access these things online, right? Because we don't have the proper safeguards, no proper age gating mechanisms and systems that would actually help to safeguard our young kids. So I actually have just put up here some things for us to ponder, right? As we listen to me, and then we'll listen to my collaborator here. It's like, where do you think youth in our community would most likely encounter vaping culture? So just think about your own community, right? Whether or not it's a school environment, whether or not online or in neighborhoods, and what can we do to actually disrupt it? As well as also thinking about, because there are some risk factors. We could think about the different health disparities, social disparities, whatnot that exist, right? So what can we do now to actually modify this? And how can we create certain interventions that would actually, our goal would be to make sure that nobody's use these products. I know that is unrealistic, but at least to really drop it down to zero. And most importantly, to address that whole rise now, that slow rise in the shifting from the e-cigarettes to that whole nicotine pouch. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Porther. That was fabulous, an enormous amount of information, like you said, but the perfect segue to Catherine. So we're going to hand it right over to Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm Catherine Brooks, and I am in the evaluation department of the Collaborative for Educational Services in Northampton. And I have been working with Heather Warner, and she leads the Hampshire Franklin Tobacco Free Community Partnership to analyze survey and focus group data to get a better understanding of what's happening locally, both with overall nicotine use, and also we did a special focus on nicotine pouch use in Hampshire and Franklin County. So let's go to the next slide. Here's an overview of what I'll be talking about today, and it's going to be a quick summary of the work that Heather and I did together recently. Next slide, please. So these were the questions that we wanted to explore with young people in Hampshire and Franklin counties. There's a lot of attention right now to nicotine use, and especially pouch use at the state and national level. We're hearing a lot about nicotine pouches being marketed to cisgender boys, and especially to those who are involved in sports. We're wondering whether pouch use has become common in middle and high schools, and whether boys are more likely than those of other genders to use pouches. We're also aware of nicotine advertising focused on the LGBTQIA+ community, and we wanted to know whether there might be differences in how young people who identify as queer might view nicotine use relative to their straight peers. We knew we needed a better understanding of what was going on locally in order to inform prevention campaigns. You can move on. To answer the questions that you just saw on the previous slide, we used both qualitative and quantitative data. Our quantitative data came from the Prevention Needs Assessment Survey, or PNAS. Now, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the PNAS. If you're not, it's an online survey that asks students about substance use behaviors as well as their own attitudes about substance use, about their perceptions of their peers and their parents' attitudes towards substance use, and protective factors. It's similar in content and in scope to the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, or the YRBS, and that's administered statewide. We do the PNAS locally, so we can get some more detailed data than is available at the state level, and we can disaggregate it in different ways. We own the data, and so we can look at it in as many different ways as we need to. Both Franklin and Hampshire County Prevention Coalitions administer customized versions of this survey to middle school and high school students across each county. And you see a little description on the slide there of what that looks like. Many of the questions stay the same from year to year, but some change with the times. Both of the surveys began including many more questions about vaping when that became popular about 8 years ago, and both surveys have recently added questions about using nicotine pouches. The full data sets provide a fairly comprehensive overview of local teen behavior and attitudes, and because the same questions are often repeated from year to year, we can use the data to track longitudinal trends. We had about 2,300 responses from Hampshire County and over 1,350 responses from Franklin County. And you can go on to the next slide. We also conducted focus groups. So this past spring, we talked with 19 high school students from both Franklin and Hampshire counties about their perceptions and attitudes about nicotine, with a special emphasis on why specific groups of students might choose to use nicotine. We recruited through peer networks and organizations, and we offered stipends to participants. We were supported by an organization called Translate Gender in Northampton for the two groups for queer students. They advised us on the question wording, they advertised the focus group through their networks, and they provided a facilitator for one of the focus groups. We asked young people in each of these groups what types of nicotine products they think are the most popular, why their peers might choose to use nicotine products. We asked about their mental images of who uses different kinds of products. And we also asked what they think the impact is of advertising, the use that they see in popular culture and social media. So we can move on. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the things we found out specifically about nicotine pouches. This is data from the Prevention Needs Assessment Survey in each of the two counties, and it talks about the percent of students who report having used each substance in the past 30 days. We usually look at past 30-day use rather than lifetime use. It's a better indicator of ongoing use as opposed to just trying something once or twice. So you see here that while students are using nicotine pouches, that's represented in the red bars, the vapes, represented in blue bars, are much more widely used. We heard this among our focus group participants as well. They reported that their peers are much more likely to vape than to use pouches. One thing I just want to note about this chart, this is an overall chart used for 8th, 10th, and 12th grades together. And so if you just looked at high school students, if you took the 8th graders out of this calculation, the rate would be higher for high school use. And you can move forward. We also learned that pouch use is growing. This chart is just for pouches, and it's just for Hampshire County because the Franklin County survey just added a a question that is specifically about nicotine pouch use this past year. Previously, they'd asked about smokeless tobacco generally, which includes pouches, but also chewing tobacco and other forms of smokeless tobacco. So in this chart, we see the past 30-day use rates for boys in blue, and all other genders mostly represents girls, but we also offered students the opportunity to identify their gender as either transgender or non-binary, or I identify in a different way. So those genders are all combined together in the red bars that you see in the survey. So you see here for 8th graders over on the left side of the chart, boys actually use pouches less than the students of other genders. But by high school, as you move to the right, those patterns have swapped. Boys are substantially more likely to use pouches than girls and transgender and non-binary students. You also see steady increases in pouch use between 2023 and 2025 for all genders, all grade levels. And you can move on. We also talked to young people in a focus group that addressed pouch use. While while this conversation was supposed to be about young men and pouch use, we found the participants actually talked a lot more about vaping. They were not perceiving a lot of pouch use among their peers. They weren't really seeing it much in popular culture or on social media. They did have some notion of pouch use being more prevalent among rural youth and among vocational school students. They also talked about the reasons why their peers might use nicotine pouches or other nicotine products. They agreed that seeing their peers use nicotine is a stronger influence on them than seeing nicotine use in pop culture, advertising, and social media. What they talked about was not overt peer pressure, not so much people ganging up and trying to coerce or convince people to try stuff, but just the peer modeling they found to be really influential. Two of the young men in the group attended vocational schools, and there was a third who had in the past. And they reported that there is a culture of nicotine use in the trades, and that's another kind of modeling that they talked about. They think that it impacts the students who are still in vocational school, but for the most part, they didn't see that as involving pouches. They were seeing that as more about cigarettes and vapes. You can move on to the next slide now. So I'm going to now talk about broader nicotine use, not just pouches and vapes, in the LGBTQIA+ community. This chart that we're looking at here is for Hampshire County, and it shows the past 30-day use rates for 3 different nicotine products: cigarettes, vapes, and pouches. And it shows the rates for both queer students, represented as blue bar, and straight students represented as a red bar. And you see there's some small differences here. But for smoking cigarettes and vaping nicotine, they're not statistically significant. However, there is a statistically significant difference for using pouches. Straight students are more likely to use them than are the queer students who took our survey. And we can move on. This is a similar chart with the Franklin County Prevention Needs Assessment Survey data. And again, you're seeing small differences between the two populations, but none of these are statistically significant. We were surprised to find that that was true even for the cigarette use rate. You see that it is double for straight students than it is for the queer students, but it is a small amount and it is not a statistically significant difference. Next slide. All right. This is a busy chart, a little bit hard to look at on a slideshow and understand, but I'll explain it a little bit. This has the top 7 reasons why students in Hampshire County chose to use nicotine. This question was not asked on the Franklin County survey. So students could select as many answers as they wanted to. They also had the option of selecting I do not use this product. So that was actually the top answer, but I'm not including it on the chart. So these questions were asked for both vaping and cigarettes. We didn't ask them for pouch use. Vaping is represented in blue bars, and we have darker blue bars for the students who identify as queer and lighter blue for those who identify as straight. Cigarettes are represented in red bars, darker red for queer students and lighter red for straight students. And you see here that the biggest reasons the young people who took the survey chose to use nicotine products was for fun and because they were curious. There are differences on this chart, as you see, between straight students and LGBTQIA+ students. But again, this is a very small number overall. If you look at the y-axis on the left, it only goes up to 6%. So these numbers, these differences look bigger than they perhaps really are. The biggest gaps we found between the straight students and the queer students were for helping with depression. And you see that's all the way over on the right side. It's pretty small. And especially for straight students, you see it more with the queer students. We're going to hear a little bit more about that later too. Also, we saw bigger gaps for reasons of being bored and being curious. Okay, we can move on. So we heard again in both of the focus groups for the LGBTQIA+ students that peer use of nicotine and other substances is a powerful motivator. When you're talking about young people who are outside of the mainstream, it may be even more powerful. This was something that the young people said in the focus groups. It's not our speculation, it came from them. Fitting in and making friends can bring more challenges for the people in this community than for other people, and that might draw them to try harder to befriend people and maybe to do that through the route of using nicotine products. We also heard from the young people we talked to speculation about how depression and other mental health issues might motivate some queer young people to self-medicate with nicotine or with other substances. And this was borne out in that slide I just showed you, with queer young people being more likely to report using both cigarettes and vapes to help with mental health challenges. But I just want to remind you that it was only a very small number of young people who chose that option at all on the survey. Having fun and being curious were more widely reported by all students. Next slide, please. Things to know about nicotine pouches. This actually echoes some of the stuff that Dr. Porther talked about, so I'm just going to talk about this very quickly. The nicotine pouches use synthetic nicotine powder. It's not derived directly from the tobacco plant, and because it's created in a lab, they can really tweak the potency and make it stronger in order to attract more people. And you see that the potency can really range quite a bit in pouch use. The flavors, concept flavors, is something that they do to evade regulations around flavors. So a concept flavor will have a taste and a smell, but it's not associated with a known flavor like strawberry or bubblegum. They make up these concept flavors so that they can get around that. And then you can just see a few other things here. These are not FDA approved for cessation, the way nicotine gum and pouches are. The patches rather than pouches. They're not taxed in the same way as nicotine products, and so the cost is lower. And state laws are not really getting behind this right now. Local boards of health are doing a lot more activity around that. Next slide, please. So what's next? We think it's important to continue to monitor pouch use, given the rise that we've seen over the past 2 years. I expect that the surveys will continue to ask questions about that and maybe add some questions about attitudes and reasons for use that are specific to pouch use. We also saw some notable differences in the data between Hampshire and Franklin counties, including pouch use rates, vape use rates, and perceptions of risk. So this is a reminder to us that effective prevention campaigns should be tailored to local conditions rather than state and national findings. We also think it's important to incorporate feedback from different communities so that the campaigns reflect their realities, which might be different from those of the overall population. And I'm just going to show you a couple more slides. We can go to the next slide. Here are some resources that are available to help teens quit, and all of you who registered are going to get these slides, so you don't have to worry about quickly writing down this information. You'll get that. There's also something called smokefree.gov and teen.smokefree.gov. There's also mass.gov/vaping. So those are all some resources. And you can also get some more information from the websites here. There's the mass.gov/vaping that I mentioned before. And getoutrage.org has a lot of resources that are really helpful for talking with teens and working in the school systems about this. And that is it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was fantastic. And I will also remind everyone the recording, the slides, and any questions that we don't get the answers to right now, we will answer and send out in a packet next week. There are lots of opportunities for action. Currently commenting on proposal to tax pouches is a policy action. There's a link there that we will have. Hopefully Lisa could pop it in the chat right now. And then also tobacco resources you can find on 413cares.org. So very quickly to the questions that came in during the registration, I just wanted to ask Dr. Porther, based on your slide about how these products impact people's health, are any of these conditions that are caused by vaping, for example, reversible? Was one of the questions. I put that to you. All right, we will move on to the next one. Hopefully she'll be back with us. Catherine, you might know this one. How can all these local stores that sell vape products without a license, and is there any way to report the stores that are selling to our youth?
This is something that Heather Warner would be able to talk for a lot about because this is very closely tied with the work that she does. Because I'm in the evaluation department, I don't have a lot of expertise in that area. I suggest if there's a way to get that question to Heather, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer that after this webinar. She just wasn't able to be here today.
Okay, so that'll be one we include the answer. Do you have any information for elementary school children and families that you could share? How much do these products cost, and how are young people getting them?
Is Dr. Porther able to come on?
I'm not sure.
No.
I hope so, but her Wi-Fi might be
It might be.
shaky. Yeah.
That is just not
Another
something
good
where
one.
not my area of
Okay.
expertise. I'm pretty familiar with what we know from the middle school and high school survey data, but I
Yeah.
don't have much expertise with the elementary school community.
Okay. How about this one? How transferable is what we learned today to vaping cannabis products?
I would say it's probably very transferable.
Okay.
And we know that that's happening. It's hard to know how much. We do have a question on the survey about what the students thought they were vaping, which is not always what they actually were vaping. But we know that that is happening. And I think a lot of the medical stuff that Dr. Porther talked about, that's still going to be an issue with vaping cannabis. The actual physical effects on the body obviously are different for cannabis and for nicotine, but we know that they do harm. And I think this is something that we're going to be seeing a lot more of.
Okay. This one you may or may not heard in your focus groups, Catherine, but are teens and young adults using nicotine gum to
Mm.
wean off of or abstain from other tobacco and nicotine products?
We don't hear very much about that. So nicotine gum is an FDA-approved cessation device. You can buy it at most pharmacies. Um, But it seems like a lot of the young people are just not really in cessation mode. They're experimenting. They're trying this out. Maybe they're getting to the point where they really feel like they're addicted and they need to pull back, but we tend not to hear them talking about it very much. And so we have not heard a lot about using gum. We heard some speculation about using pouches as a way to not vape and not smoke because the pouch is not damaging to your lungs. But that was really just speculation.
Okay, thank you. And I feel like you both sort of touched on this, but I just want to ask you the question directly. But is CBD oil being found in any of these products?
Hmm, I don't think so.
Okay.
But again, I think that's probably a better question for Heather.
Okay, we can look that up for sure. Okay, so those were the registration questions. Now, okay, so let's see, one question, if Dr. Porther is there and she knows, but again, how frequently is nicotine poisoning seen in the 0 to 5-year-old group? Are nicotine pouches the most serious risk factor? And I know you said you,
I wouldn't know that, but that's
yeah,
an excellent
that's a good
question, and
question.
it would not surprise me if the pouches are more accessible than cigarettes or vapes. Because kids put everything in their mouths, and it's designed to be delivered through the mouth, unlike some other things where you have to actively smoke them. So I
Yeah.
could see that being a pretty serious problem.
Okay, so that's another good one we can research and answer.
Mhm.
And then the first question for today said, I've been hearing for years that almost 80% of smoking starts before the age of 18. I've been looking all over for that data resource. Can you help? Note, I've seen it cited by the FDA, went to their site and not finding citation source. Thank you. I'm
Mhm.
sure that is something you can speak to, Catherine.
Oh, well, I wish I could answer it. That definitely got my evaluation juices going because, there are things like that that are just out there. They've been out there for years. Everyone says them. Where did they come from? Because I really only focus on middle school and high school use, this would be looking at smokers of all ages. And it really had me wondering, I saw this before, who got that data and how? Yeah, you would have to be asking people who smoke. Who did that? Who did that survey and how comprehensive was it and how long ago was it too? I don't know the answer to that. I'm kind of interested in finding out, but unfortunately, I can't give you a quick answer to that right now.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Um, so, okay, now moving to the chat, there was a question, are there oral and dental health effects concern for pouch use?
Yeah, absolutely. There are. We've been seeing this for a while with the snuff and the chewing tobacco that are also consumed in the mouth. I mean, there's a long history there of that causing problems, oral and dental health problems. And the pouches in their current incarnation haven't been around long enough for there to be long-term studies about this. But I think we can fully expect that there will be the same kinds of, that will result in the same kinds of problems that we've seen with other forms of oral nicotine use.
Yeah. And I think that that just really underscores the point that these are somewhat new products and they
Hmm.
get into our communities, they get on the market, they get into our communities, our young people are using them, and we don't know everything, and then
Right.
therefore we don't know how to mitigate them. So there's definitely more research to come and hopefully more regulation and support for families and schools and anyone, obviously that has young people that they're concerned about use. Um, I do want to acknowledge the questions in the chat. There are questions from Hampden County school districts that we can certainly share. Today, we were focused on our speakers, which we're so grateful to have from Berkshire and Catherine speaking for Hampshire and Franklin, but definitely we do have similar data for Hampden County that we can share. And I also want to recognize that this webinar and the work that the Public Health Institute of Western Mass has been doing in partnership with so many of you and the Women of Color Health Equity Collective is supported by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and the Mass Tobacco Cessation Program. And so really trying to understand how to support communities, young people, families, policymakers, school systems, everyone with regard to new products and how to get information and share and act on policy eventually. So I want to thank everyone for coming. We are at time. We would love it if you could please just take a moment and fill out the survey, give us feedback. We are hoping to potentially have a webinar on policy in a couple of months from now, maybe the second half of this school year. And we really look forward to that. But we will be getting you the recording, the slide deck, the answers to the questions you've asked. And again, just so very grateful for your participation today in this important discussion. So thank you so much, Catherine and Dr. Porther. Really very much appreciate your time and your expertise and thoughtfulness. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.